down and he was going to join the panel.
Okay.
We'll
So-
just interrupt him. We put an extra
Maybe
chair
we
over
can
there
get the
for him,
panel as
so.
big as the attendees.
Yes.
All right, so to start off, if you want to just introduce yourselves and say what sessions you attended or what you were doing at ONA. I know, Stephanie, you are not necessarily attending sessions in the traditional sense. Whoever wants to go first. Don't all jump at
I'll
once.
go first. All right. I'm Brian Steffens, Director of Communications for the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I've been going to ONA for several years now, and mostly go to see what's new and to make connections and to maybe scout out future fellows for the Reynolds Fellowship Program. I went to several sessions, didn't stay for all of them necessarily. You always want to go to Amy Webb's 10 Trends, that's pretty good. Hale from Chartbeat was very interesting, liked him a lot. I stayed for part of Kelly McBride's ethics panel, and native advertising and some other things. I spent a lot of time on the Midway. Actually, this year I thought a lot of the more interesting stuff was in the Midway and the trade show, not necessarily in the presentations.
I'm Stephanie Ebbs. I was attending ONA for the first time as part of the student newsroom, so I spent most of my time running back and forth between panels and the newsroom, writing out pieces. I did a piece on algorithms based on a couple of different sessions, a piece on covering trending topics on Twitter and Snapchat, and then helped out with a bunch of other little things. I also went to Amy Webb and the Sesame Street keynote and the big panels.
Annie Hammett, KOMU Interactive Director. I was really interested in things I thought I could make work for KOMU. I specifically went to half mobile, which is what newsrooms need to do when they're 50% mobile or more. Push alerts, something we don't do at KOMU, but I'm hoping one day we do. The Ferguson keynote, the New York Times keynote. I had hoped to go to Amy Webb, but the only way I could get back to Columbia on the same day I had planned to was to leave early. So I actually did not go to any Sunday sessions, and it just broke my heart. It was like, we can send you back to Columbia if you come now. Okay. And I went to the session where Roger Gaffney spoke on behalf of our KOMU online, ONA grant, social media and public affairs programming called Town Square. I was a member of the audience. I did get a shout out, but I didn't actually have to speak, which was nice.
Okay, so first real question. What was probably the biggest takeaway that you felt you got from ONA, just overall? What was sort of the buzzword or one of the main topics that everyone seemed to be hovering around?
Well, from my perspective, it was probably immersive storytelling. The Des Moines paper got a lot of buzz around their virtual Oculus Rift program. In fact, Saturday, I guess it was, there was a lineup waiting to sit at the 2-3 workstations that people could experience it. And you don't normally see lines in a trade show, for a single booth or whatever. But the flip side of that is Dan Archer, who might or might not show up, had what I call a low-tech or a low-price or low-budget version of that, and he demonstrated that using Ferguson as a model. And he also got a lot of buzz. He had a lot of one-on-one conversations. He presented a couple of times in the bull ring, and then he had an hour a day at the RGI table. And he was never at a loss for somebody trying to find out more about it. He's talking to the Beacon about updating that Ferguson package he built for their website. He's talking to Post-Dispatch for doing the same thing. And he's had some conversations with Fusion. So, I mean, there was just a lot going on around that issue, both high-tech, high investment, and low-tech, low investment. That was kind of cool.
I really picked up on the trend of algorithms, which is why I ended up pitching that piece, because of a panel that Liz Herron from Facebook was on, where a lot of people from the audience ended up expressing a lot of frustration about the lack of understanding about how Facebook prioritizes content, and it kind of led to conversations about how many algorithms are really out there and what a big impacts they have on the information we consume. And I found that to be a really interesting conversation that resonated for a little while after the conference was over, and I think will continue to be of a lot of interest to publishers and kind of publishers trying to get the awareness out to everyone about what algorithms are. And then there was a lot of talk about new technology and the potential for that, like wearable tech, but how we're not quite to the point of actually it being part of our everyday life. But yeah, but lots of interesting ideas going around.
I think that the most common theme I heard, and I heard it at multiple sessions, was this idea that mobile is becoming the reality so quickly that I heard it in 2 different sessions, some variation on the phrase "the homepage is dead." People aren't going to desktops so much anymore as they're coming through push alerts and social and going directly to the page that they had show up on their screen, on their personal screens. And once, I can't remember exactly who said what in which session, but in one session someone said, it was push alert session, with mobile, you can actually reach out and tap people on the shoulder. And then in the New York Times panel, someone said that reporters should start caring less about getting the A1 than getting a story that, or landing on the homepage, not A1, but landing on the homepage, than getting a story that gets pushed by the New York Times. Because your story may language on the homepage, but if it gets pushed, you're going to actually make someone's leg vibrate, which I thought was a really good,
really
powerful message.
Okay. If we want, we can. Dan, do you want to join us at the join a panel
Sure.
table? We'll have you. We only had a couple questions, so you can jump in with.
Yeah. Thanks.
With that too, one of the things from Amy's talk that really stuck with me was that she talked about all of the responsive tech and like smart tech, these apps that can coordinate your question with your schedule, with your text messages and all this stuff. But she talked about providing content for what people are doing at that moment. So maybe there should be more than a print version and a web version and a mobile version of the story. Maybe we should think about a version of the story for when you're jogging, a version for when you're in the shower. A very much like, what is our audience doing right at this moment, and how can we get our content to them no matter what they're doing?
By the way, her presentation is online, so if you missed it, you can still catch up on it.
Dan, if you want to jump in, you just want to introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about what you felt the biggest takeaway you saw at ONA conference.
Yeah, sure. I am one of the 2 RJI residential fellows this year, and as part of my project, I set up a transmedia visual consultancy for newsrooms called Empathetic Media, and I was demoing and debuting my Ferguson interactive sort of virtual reality piece that had just come from user testing all day today. And the upshot was very positive. There was a lot of great feedback. A handful of partners I've since been invited to present to their teams in-house in New York, which was great, ProPublica among them. And I think really I just found, have you talked about the Gannett virtual reality? Oh, so Gannett had a big booth quite near us, which was this suite about this long of the tables with 6, well, a half a dozen, I want to say 4 or 5 pods connected to the Oculus Rift headsets. And so it was the partnership that they'd set up with the Des Moines Register, and it was the first of its kind interactive piece built in Unity, also containing 360-degree video. And really, I saw, completely unintentionally, but my Ferguson iteration was almost at the other end of the spectrum in that they still use the same engine, but it's supposed to be much less involved and expensive and high production. It's supposed to be for a faster turnaround and a smaller scale. I think people found the experience hugely immersive at the Gannett thing, with the Oculus, with a headset, but I think people also found it sort of almost prohibitively so, in that it was new technology, they weren't sure how many of the readership would actually have them, and also did that sort of story necessitate that sort of treatment. So, contrastly, I found that the Ferguson piece I've done to simultaneously sort of juxtapose the different testimonies, and that's why I think it works very well. At least the feedback has been very helpful in that respect. And I think it was just a question of seeing how people are much more open to new technology. I've been to ONA in the past and people have talked the talk, but no one has really jumped on it. I felt there was a lot of people were much more open to innovation, editors in particular, which I found very buoying, refreshingly so. And just a question of how we can make it work. I think it's getting people to think of stories that they could apply, direct concrete examples rather than saying, the future's all about VR. It's like, what does that mean to you? Like, if you're a small outfit, do you have a story in mind, and what could that be?
Okay, if you want to talk, any of you want to talk a little bit about what are some skills you saw at ONA that are becoming more important that student journalists should be aware of and be honing as they're going out and looking for jobs?
Well, we've talked about it already a bit here. It's all mobile. It's not mobile is coming, mobile is here. So that's pretty much it. I think paying attention to changing metrics. We'd all been focused on page views and click-throughs and that kind of stuff, and now they're trying to look at different forms of measurement. They're now talking about attention. It's not whether you looked at it or not, but did you stick with it? Did it take you to another page? Did it get you to respond or take action in some way? Almost looking at it as call to action like you do in advertising. So more engagement. We've always talked about engagement, but I think there was a lot more of it there talking about the attention span. And that's what Hale talked about from Chartbeat. There's a quote I had in here from him I liked a lot. Don't abrogate management to data. Typical analytics reward and incentivize programs, promote what worked yesterday. They do not necessarily promote quality or creativity. Quotas can stifle change and progress. So from a guy that runs an analytics firm, I took that as, oh, I didn't expect that. So it's what wasn't mentioned at this one that I saw at South by Southwest last year. I think the place to be thinking is not analyzing, tracking, measuring what you did or what you did yesterday, but what kinds of data can lead you to predict what you need to do next. In other words, it's just starting to get some buzz. They call it predictive analytics. I don't think it's been totally defined yet. I'm not sure anybody knows how to do it yet, but that's really where you want to go. And that drive really was led by the ad side. I mean, that's exactly what Amazon does and some of the others. Well, how do we apply that to news? So I see that coming at us.
I saw that in the New York Times panel. Tyson Evans talked about that reporters tend to think of page views as currency. Like, oh, I got 20,000 page views. That's okay. Oh, I got 150,000 page views. Yay, I'm rich. But that it has, the whole team sort of talked about at the panel the need to go beyond, like he said, and talk about engagement. And the Times has started this audience engagement team, and they spent a lot of their panel talking about that. It was something of a theme last year. I attended several sessions in 2013 on analytics, and there was the beginnings of these discussions back then, and I think they've sort of coalesced around this idea that James Robinson last year at the New York Times said, my wife doesn't judge how much I love her by how many flowers I give her, and that stories matter even if they aren't getting the big, huge numbers, and that's because the audience is not monolithic. It's not like you have one audience and it's all the same. The audience is broken into numerous fragments, and if you have a story that appeals to 20,000 people who like to cook, and you get them really engaged in your cooking app, that's valuable. Just as valuable as a story like Snowfall that gets like 21 million page views or something.
I think from the student perspective, a big takeaway was to be paying attention to what people in the industry are talking about and the questions that they're asking. I work with analytics on a regular basis, so these conversations made sense to me. If you're, a student that's just saying, well, okay, I'm in convergence or broadcast, or I've been a print reporter, so what do I do now to market myself to employers? It's just to be knowledgeable about what they're talking about and knowing what questions they're asking. So, even if you don't understand what predictive analytics is, know the meaning of analytics and kind of the philosophy behind it, and know what to ask. I covered a session on how to use Snapchat for news organizations, which was really interesting. And one of the questions that people started asking right off the bat is, how do I measure this? How do I measure the impact of what I'm doing on Snapchat? Which is really challenging. But if you just know when you're going into the workforce or going into interviews that that's what employers are thinking about and that's what people in the industry are thinking about, you can ask really smart questions and make really smart comments that show that you're being really thoughtful about what's going on.
And I would, to add to that, I would pick up on Brian's point about there not being just a single, the old conventional way both of producing stories and measuring their success is now completely changed. And so I think students going forward shouldn't be thinking, oh, I've done this piece or I've cut that video. They need to be thinking how they've strung almost like an argument together through different stories and different forms of media. So, I made it, it's not enough to just say, I put this audio slideshow or this podcast together. Like, when I was covering this story, I felt that this was the best way to do it, so I did a little podcast, and then I also cut some YouTube, and then I had a Twitter thing, and then managed to engage people in a dialogue, because I think it's all about building, like we said, like engagement seems to be the key thing, and particularly within apps, whether it's like AJ Plus's app or the New York Times' mobile app, like how, certainly moving into that mobile space, but how you can become even more of a one-man band, I think is really critical, and not just to say, I made this piece and then expect it to sort of explode once you publish it. I think people, they want to see more transparency, like the process, or like why did you make those decisions? And so it fosters a sense of transparency, but also dialogue with the audience.
Yeah, I think one of the things to look at if you're going out into the workforce is be prepared for continual change. In other words, if you're building a portfolio or whatever, and you say, here's this podcast or whatever, like Dan said, don't dwell on it, but talk about how you're going to improve it the next time, or what you're going to take it to the next. Predictive analytics might be the big thing this month or the next couple of months, but something else is going to come down the road, and you've got to have an open mind to find out what that is and what it means to you, if at all, and how to do so. For people from my generation, that was a hard lesson to learn. You come from a factory style, even in news. You assign a story, you report a story, you edit a story, you put it in the paper, or you put it on TV, and it was very much an assembly line. No such thing anymore. That assembly line is very mushy, can be different from hour to hour, and we have to be in a constant state of adapting to whatever's changing out there. The other thing I would think, whether you're there or not, networking. I'm not sure students, until maybe their senior year, really get that sometimes, but it's hugely important. And be a reporter even if you don't have, you were working in the newsroom or whatever, but as an attendee, you could be doing the same thing. Most of the professionals that are there, if you catch them out in the hallway or whatever, will attempt to answer your questions unless you just keep them on, for too long. But, and just that interest puts you ahead of the game, because you can send all the emails you want, you can listen to all the portfolios on the web that you've created, but if they have that personal connection, they remember that face, they remember that you asked a reasonable question, you've got a leg up when it comes to trying to get an interview for that job or to be considered for that opening or whatever. And if you're back here and you can't do that, work the same thing. Work your professors, work the people that come here. We have a heck of a lot of professionals that come here, either through RJI or guest speakers in various classes, the honor medalists that are coming up, the fellows like Dan. Those are all opportunities to network. Dan's going to go off to somewhere else, and he's going to know people, and that connection that you might have might end up a job.
Yeah, and I would say, I would say follow up with that as well. Don't talk to someone at the conference and then email them 6 months later and say, hey, can I apply for your internship.
Senior social producer at CNN tweeted at me after the session saying, thank you, you did a great job live tweeting me. She's taken that role since I worked there, you know, and even though I worked at CNN, I did not know her personally, but she and I have since connected. We exchanged tweets back and forth, you know, and several of the presenters favorited tweets, so my name is now familiar to them, you know. The power of the @mention on Twitter cannot be underestimated.
I think it's also really important when you're meeting all these people, everyone is going to be ricocheting off everyone else, and you have a smaller and smaller window. What I was blown away by is people would say, can I meet with you? You'd literally have them for 2 minutes, but either between speeches or before they met someone else. And so in a way you have to, I would say to students, like, have your elevator pitch for yourself. Like, why should they want to talk to you? Are you the next, you know, like my niche, for example, is the transmedia graphic journalism space. And so if you can say, here's some stuff, I've just been live sketching the last talk, check it out on my Twitter. Or, hey, I just made this data viz and I can do it really quickly, quicker than anyone else can. You know, like, because and then people would introduce me to other people and they'd say, he's the graphic journalism guy. And it's just so much easier, I think, for people to do that than to be like, here's another student that needs it, you know? So if you can think, obviously you need kind of a phalanx of different versatile skills, but if there's something in particular that speaks to you, like coding or WebGL or whatever it is, like think about something that really makes you stick out even a bit, then that would really help.
I thought that ONA was a really social group of people.
Yeah.
Like, if you're nervous about networking, I consider myself pretty introverted, and I think networking is really awkward. It was so easy to talk to people. They would like tweet at each other like, hey, are you done with this talk? Let's meet in this spot in the hallway and like chat for a couple minutes. There were like pop-up meetings happening all over the place. And I thought that was really great, especially because it's a group of people that have really unique jobs. So it's like, you know, I consider myself, you know, a lot of people there call themselves digital journalists, which could encompass a lot of things, but I found it really refreshing as a student who's starting to enter the industry. I've been doing print reporting for a long time, and I get kind of burnt out on that. And I know a lot of people in the same spot kind of entering the job world. It's like, well, I'm kind of tired of what I've been doing, but I don't know what else is out there other than reporter, editor, fill in the blank, traditional journalism job title here. This is a place where people have like jobs that nobody else has. They're creating new kinds of jobs. It's a really exciting place to be if you're interested in going into journalism and maybe combining things that aren't usually combined or doing something that you may never have heard of somebody doing before.
Callie Schweitzer, who talked at the Twitter Tempest panel, had said last year that she's never had a job that she didn't invent. That she would go to people and say, you need this done and I can do it.
Is she still at Time?
And I think, you know, she's 24 and the director of digital innovation at Time. I mean, that's pretty impressive. But she's completely blazed her own path by being very assertive and networking and being somewhat prescient about what's needed and making it clear that the people who mattered knew what she could do for them.
Job hunting, a couple of things. Repetition is important in a sense. It's like sales. You got to be in front of them every other day. They don't buy a tire today because their car works fine, but when the tire goes flat, all of a sudden they look for a tire ad. And it's somewhat the same. I hate to say this, but I know a lot of people that hire, often the first people to get the interview are the last people that contacted them because they're on their desk and haven't been filed. You know, when that resume comes in or whatever, or it's in their inbox, those get it even if somebody perhaps more qualified showed up 3 weeks ago. So always put something in front of them. And when you do that, make sure that in between, when you send them the new thing, that it shows growth in what you're capable of and what you're doing, and that your little note or whatever you send along with it emphasizes that or points out how this has grown since the last time you contact. If you're sending them the same thing over and over, just a different subject, that's not going to get you anywhere. But if you can say, well, I've grown, I've learned this, or I've tried that, or I added this to my repertoire, that helps get that attention. And if you really want to work someplace, do that every few months, 3, 6 months, don't wait every other year or whatever. I mean, even old school, you know, the way I did it, I had a new job after 9 months, and I had my third job after another 9 months. So in 18 months, I was at my third place at work already.
Don't just ask them, don't just tell them what you're doing, ask them about what they're doing, know what they're doing that's new and different, and say, you know, hey, I've noticed you're doing this, I'm really interested in it, would you mind talking to me about it, sharing a little bit about it? People like it when you're interested in their work, and when you've shown them that you are savvy about what they're doing and have cared enough to keep up with what they're doing, that's just a fresh way to approach them maybe the next time. So it's not always about, hey, look what I'm doing. There's a little bit of back and forth, can be really helpful.
To what you say about the woman from Time, was it?
Time.
Yeah. The first couple of jobs I took, I applied for a job. It existed. I wanted that job, in both of those, 3 of those jobs. But after that third one, I started gravitating toward where things were happening and had a pressure point, and they needed help or didn't know how to do it. And I may not have known how to do it. But you know, you kind of raise your hand and say, hey boss, I see this over here, and I see nobody really knows what to do with it. Let me run with it. And in a sense, then every job I had after that point was kind of in that vein. If you can solve a problem for your boss, you'll get that job, you'll get that promotion, you'll get whatever you're looking for. If you can make your boss's life easier. So I always kind of went like the moth to the flame. Wherever there was something burning and they didn't know how to put it out, I'd go try and put it out. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't.
I think that collaborative spirit is also very true there. You know, a lot of people, you have discussions with them, they're like, well, let's just put something together, you know, like very informal. I think breaking down this barrier of like, oh, you know, this is going to be a long-term project, there are too many obstacles, people are just willing to like iterate and jump on something. And I think also if you're going to commit to something or say you're going to do something, then follow up and do something quickly. Because there's a real sense of like Silicon Valley almost there, that you just need to capitalize on it. So
Yeah, the Lone Ranger used to be kind of a model.
Yeah.
In journalism, it's not. It really wasn't when I was in the day-to-day grind in some respects. I mean, reporting was, even then, was a team effort between journalists and photojournalists before video got into the game. And when graphics and news graphics came along, I spent much of my life at the LA Times doing training with news, photo, across the board. Everybody in the newsroom had to take a training class or they couldn't be considered for a raise. So that just consumed a whole year of my time pretty much, just doing training. On building teams. I mean, you don't really achieve greatness without a team. When my photo staff won the Pulitzer, it wasn't one person. It wasn't one photographer. It wasn't one photo editor or anything. We had a staff of about 8 photographers covering the Olympics, and we had 4 or 5 photo editors. And the planning that went into it was company-wide. I mean, you don't do that on your own.
This is sort of a switch conversationally wise, but Brian, earlier on you mentioned that advertising seems to be pushing some of the innovation in journalism, and you said you attended the ethics discussion, I believe. Would you like to talk a little bit about sort of that native advertising which has sprung up and how that was discussed ethically at ONA?
Well, it was discussed a lot, and it was pretty much stuck to the traditional church and state dividing line. That's their take, that panel. There's a lot of discussion that takes it further out on the web if you're watching it. I've got several I put out on RJI links and whatever. There's not a uniform agreement on how that works or why it works or what the rules are. But those on that panel pretty much said it can work, but you have to have a team that does that, and it has nothing to do with the editorial team or the news team. And that's pretty standard. I think there's nuance in there, opportunity for nuance. It's how do you define native advertising? If you're writing something that sells the sponsor or the advertiser, yes, you need that church and state. But a lot of what they're calling sponsored content is not a whole lot different than your daily newspaper or your daily news report on television. you're doing a report and Mockins Ford is sponsoring it. You know, does that mean that the report, you know, is influenced by Mockins? No more so than, you know, if there's a budget hassle and somebody needs money, but no, I mean, the whole paper is sponsored. You know, all the ads that are in the Missouri and are in the Tribune are sponsored by the advertisers. If you approach sponsored content as news and information that's of interest and relevant to the reader, is not biased, adheres to all the rules of journalism, it can still be sponsored. In a sense, look at the Tribune. Every week they run a half-page NASCAR, and it's an AP story, but Joe Mockins sponsors it. Well, Mockins had no input as to what AP wrote for that story, and they do that every week. And you can do that, and a lot of places kind of do. Where you'll see it most, maybe, is in the hospital systems. They just want healthy lifestyles. They don't, you may never mention Boone Hospital or University of Missouri Hospital. They just say, eat right, exercise, all the things your doctor tells you. But they'll pay for that, to get that message out.
I produced a show for 4 years. It was underwritten by a bank, a personal finance show.
Yeah, so I think there's a little more discussion than the old church and state hard line. I think that line wiggles, and I think sometimes we find it under our feet, and that's not always a bad thing.
And I think from some of the conversations that were happening at ONA, that people are getting more comfortable with the blurring of that line, with the understanding that you maintain strong journalism ethics, but that you have to sort of build a relationship between the business side and the editorial side because of the financial challenges of supporting digital journalism versus, you know, sort of this legacy media that has bigger advertising dollars. And, you know, at KMU, we have sponsored segments. You know, it's not native. I mean, you know, we make it clear. I think some of the discussion over native advertising is when it's heavily disguised. You know, so the idea that you need to make it clear that it's an ad, you know, versus sponsored content, you know, and try to make sure the lines are where they need to be. But that church and state line is definitely blurring some. I think people are more welcoming of the idea, or at least more willing to discuss the idea than
Well, I
they
think
used to be.
it's whether or not you use it to sell, to hit somebody over the head to do this, go to this hospital, go buy this or whatever, versus you give them information that is relevant to your reader, but the sponsor has an interest in that message also being shared out there. So I mean, I think there's room to maneuver that doesn't sell journalism down the river necessarily. I'd encourage you to watch RJI this year. We have a fellow that's focused on native advertising. Works for a small paper up in Minnesota. She'll be here for the Potter Conference at the end of November. She's one of the institutional fellowships. And she's trying to carve out a sponsored news platform for a very small paper. They can't afford to go out and hire a separate staff to do this. So what they've done is they've hired a person half-time to fill in for a person that's replacing her as managing editor while she devotes time to developing this. She's already got like 30 clients. They're willing to pay her, you know, good money to do these stories. And these stories are strictly journalism. They have no say, no editing, no veto power on the story. But the content, the ones she's lined up, have interest in promoting healthy lifestyles or other things like that. And I think it'll be interesting to watch because she just did a post. We just put it up yesterday, I think. She interviewed somebody for one of those stories, and they knew her as the managing editor of the paper, but then found out later this was for a sponsored ad. He was pissed, the source, and was all bent out of shape about it. So I've then, you know, I've reached out to like Kelly McBride at Pointer, who's an MU grad, and an ethics specialist, and a couple of others. And so now we started a conversation. You know, what does this need? Where do we need to go with this conversation, and how do we address this? So this will be an ongoing story. And you can, some of it will be at RJI, and some of it will be just on the web everywhere.
I think as readers are more agnostic, also in terms of, like you say, getting their news from a single source, but it's increasing the relationship with advertisers. Like, there's a lot of content. Medium now are doing sponsor content. There's a piece called Reform, sponsored by BMW. It obviously has nothing to do with it. It's a design thing, but it's really, like you say, it's not front and center. It doesn't hit you over the head. It just has that logo at the bottom. And I think it's
How's that any different than PBS?
right.
Brought to you by the William Woods Foundation or whatever.
Okay, this is ruling, it's gonna go on the internet, but I don't even wanna tell you how old I was before I realized that viewers like you were the donors. I thought that viewers like you was some kind of an advertiser that was a I was old. It was last year. Okay, maybe not quite.
Close.
Was there any talk about workflow and sort of, we talked about technology on the front end, and I think, I don't know, I'm just wondering if anybody talked about the back end, speeding up reporting, getting information into multiple places by submitting one form. Yeah.
There was some talk of workflow in the half mobile session, mostly about CMSs and optimizing them for mobile previews and social previews. And BuzzFeed has a really nifty CMS coming up, and you put in your story and you put in your social, and it'll actually show you, here's how it's going to look on Facebook, here's how it's going to look on Twitter, here's how it's going to look on whatever other platform you say. And their CMS is going to actually show as the default the mobile presentation, and you'll actually have to scroll down to see the desktop presentation. So I think that's an indication of how workflow is changing, and this idea that we need to be thinking more about what does it look like on mobile, how does it act on mobile, can you check to make sure the picture is sized optimally, that that every little thing works the way it's supposed to with the interface, and actually being able, it's actually going to send that preview to, you can send it to your phone and actually hold your phone and work through the preview to make sure everything's working the way you think it's going to work before you publish.
I didn't see as much of it as you might think. It is a hot topic, but it's also a thorny one. So it's not an easy one to dissect in 40 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that some of these, local stations and papers and stuff, I guess maybe they're not thinking about it like they weren't thinking about some other technology that's appeared in the last 10 years, but if somebody comes in and they can generate content at lightning speed, I would think.
Well, most of the legacy media anyway, they uniformly agree that the existing CMS systems suck.
Absolutely.
So you're looking at BuzzFeed, and then I just read the last couple of days, the Washington Post has kind of accidentally created a new one starting off of WordPress. It's called Page View and Story Builder. And I'm interested to see how that works out, and if they're going to license that out to others, or is it just going to be for the Washington Post? But yeah, if they could solve the CMS problem, that would open up a whole lot of things for all of us in journalism.
And I know I keep going back to last year, but it just seemed like some of these topics have been going on for more than a year.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a panel last year in which someone got a lasting round of applause for just saying CMS are the worst things that's ever happened to storytelling. And I think that remains true. So if you can create a good CMS, you'll make lots of sense.
And speaking of which, Microsoft also just announced their Sway platform, which I think is a step towards trying to do that in the prosumer space. I played around a little bit with it, but again, it sort of skirts a weird middle ground, I think, of the audio slideshows and the interactivity. But the main advantage of it is that it does optimize to multiple devices, and I think that's really the key thing. I think that you have to be thinking about how it looks across all different browsers and all different devices when you publish or create anything.
My goal for I don't know how many years out would be, right now we have this big conversation. Are you a journalist or are you a coder? Or how do you bring those together? And we do that here at the school a lot, trying to bring those two disciplines together. But at some point, somebody's going to build a platform where we can go back to concentrating on storytelling, and the coding part and the CMS part are going to be kind of like using your iPhone or whatever now. And that's where I want to see things go, but that may be a decade away. Oh no.
Yeah, there was some talk about that. I didn't see a lot of it in the professional sense, like workflows, but just what our organization puts out on how can the technology that we use make people's lives easier and give them the information that they want right away. I was really kind of blown away in Amy Webb's presentation. She showed a couple of apps, and she used the example, I texted my sister, hey, do you want to go to a movie? And the app pulls up the movies that are in theaters right now. And I can click the movie and see the trailer and the show times at my local theater. And then I say, oh, well, let's get dinner before. And the app can find a restaurant and suggest times for reservations that coordinate with the movie that I chose. And that's just that's like the work of a giant computer happening on your phone. It's like what your brain would normally be doing, but the technology is doing it for you. And there's kind of the conversation about how can our journalism be more like that? How can we give people everything that they want in that moment rather than just, here's this story, have it.
Any other questions? What was the biggest surprise for you in anything that you saw or heard at ONA?
The all-pervasive power of Twitter, I think, was a real. I mean, I knew that everyone tweets, but in panel after panel, like even on the Ferguson keynote, I think all of the journalists said that they originally found out about it through Twitter. Like that is just, it's like the de rigueur way of, and that sort of lean response, like immediately jumping straight into stuff, I think was kind of a shock to me.
I think the overall attitude at ONA was a lot of excitement, which shouldn't be surprising, but it is because we hear so much negativity, especially as students sometimes when you talk to people, it's like, oh, you're in journalism? Sorry. But everyone at ONA was talking about all of these new things, and look at what we're doing, and look at what we're going to be doing in 10 years, and look at these technologies. You know, it's a really interesting time to be a journalist that's just starting out their career, because if you continue in this industry for 15 years, your job will probably look completely differently than everything you've learned here. And that's scary, but it was really great to be around people who were really excited about that possibility.
I don't know that I was surprised by it so much as it's just kind of a sad reality that while everyone's thinking about how flexible and adaptable and agile we need to be digitally, that even big media companies are still struggling with how to do that. The New York Times is such a great example on their innovation report. Is so important to the industry, I think. And you know, the moderator said it's like having to turn a cruise ship, and then Amy O'Leary said it's having to turn a cruise ship every day. And the fact that that's still an issue, as much as everybody knows it shouldn't be, you know, there are a lot of great minds working on it, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because I met with Now This News, which are almost like deliberately trying to put themselves in the opposite space, as lean as possible. They said they constantly, their average length of staff employment is 6 months because they're just constantly poached, and they get things up within minutes or the hour of events happening. And I think there's that. But when I spoke to one of their senior execs, she was just talking about how they're constantly innovating and iterating and just so loose, and I was really impressed by that sort of flexibility that people are willing to have. I guess it's embracing that same thing that we talked about. That if you're willing to not quite know your space and agree that and concede that the skills that you have will probably need refreshing every 1 or 2 years, then it's a great time to be a journalist.
Yeah, and that's said in the innovation report, the New York Times report, that they needed to be more willing to fail, that they needed to be more willing to be bold and take chances. And that's something that is a big legacy operation that management has been loath to do. And so you get these smaller, more lean operations, and they're more equipped to deal with that, and they're more embracing of the idea and being iterative.
Another big surprise for me was playing Cards with Humanity with Robert Hernandez at like 2 o'clock in the morning. because they host a pajama party in the middle of the night every year with like pizza and rum and just people hanging out. And that was just really cool, and just an example of like, this is a really social group of professionals that love to talk to each other and socialize with each other, and I think sometimes we take ourselves a little too seriously, both in school and as professionals, and it's fun to just be around people who, you know, we do the same thing for a living, but we can also just hang out and eat pizza too.
I think the presence of the Muppets kind of indicate ONA willingness to play.
I have never seen a room of so many people like so excited that they were going to cry at the same time.
Well, and there were plenty of people who snuck in for the day to come see Cookie Monster.
There were
too.
like people brought their kids. It was
But you know, I having got there late, the Sesame Street keynote was one of the few that I went to. And I think it's an important lesson that they were trying to teach, and the idea of constantly seeking out younger audiences and keeping them loyal generation after generation. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns right now for our industry is, you know, the generation like my grandmother who subscribed to the newspaper for 70 years won't be doing that much longer. And that's a challenge we need to figure out, is how do we replace that audience with people who are your guys' age.
Yeah, I thought they had a really good message. Even about like telling really serious stories in a way that's appropriate for your audience. They were talking about, you know, they do these kind of videos and projects that aren't part of the show but are for specific audiences. So like episodes of Sesame Street for children of military families about separation and possible death of a loved one and things like that. And they were talking about, you know, this is a really heavy topic, but we're going to talk about it with a pink puppet that talks in a high squeaky voice, so that our audience can absorb that really heavy message. And, you know, I don't see puppets in the near future of very many news organizations, but I think the message is there, that you have to think about who your audience is and whether heavy, like, doom and gloom information is the best way to get them to relate to the information.
There's a lot of different storytelling. It wasn't necessarily ONA, but Dan's done what I call the comic book approach, and Erin Polgreen has done the same. She launched a magazine or a comic book,
She's watching our tweets today, actually, because she's favorited a bunch. She's retweeted them.
So that, you know, it's another type of storytelling that we don't see much of, but we might see more of just for that, because it'll reach different audiences.
I'm looking forward to go back and reading the tweet stream here.
No pressure, Maria.
You're doing great.
That at Annie Hammock is awesome, I believe, is your next tweet.
But it is funny how, yeah, you know, how all this is happening like in real time, that we can respond to it. We know that Erin's watching us right now, for example. Like I was doing live sketches all the way through it, and doing the mentions, and you know, Wesley Lowry was like, this is brilliant, like, and I wasn't, you know, you don't, it's very rare that you can expect to have that sort of immediacy straight away with someone you have no idea, you know, you've never met before. So I thought that's just really incredible, provided, you know, you can think of a way to sort of flag them surreptitiously.
It makes, you know, Twitter can make a very large world very small. There's a gentleman by the name of Ian Hill who I noticed kept retweeting me, and then I started paying attention to him and I started retweeting him. And as I was trying to find the Billy Goat Tavern, the
I
evening
said
of
it was
the,
downstairs.
I saw this guy on the street and I said, hey, you look a little bit like you know where you're going. Do you happen to know where the Billy Goat Tavern is? And he's like, he had an ONA sticker on, and it was Ian Hill. And we ended up having a quite robust discussion, and we knew each other from Twitter, even though we had never set eyes on each other. And it was one of those really special moments, you know, that happen at conferences like that, and that networking that happens, and very serendipitous, I thought.
That needs to be like a commercial for Twitter. Like how
Yeah. I think if there are no more questions.
do you guys have any questions?
Just yours or
Come. Deadline day burnout.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us and answering some questions, even though we got a little late start. It was great having you guys. Is there anything else you want to add? Just the final interview question. Is there anything else we should have asked?
Yeah.
No, I would say if any students are going to watch it, definitely consider applying for ONA Newsroom. I had a fabulous experience. I met a lot of like mentors are out of the park. Got to meet a lot of other journalism students from other programs, which was interesting. You know, the programs that were in the room were not what you might expect if you consider, you know, quote, best and the brightest journalism students, but it was great to hang out with them, and it was a different perspective on the experience. You know, if you want to just go and network and learn a lot, it's maybe not right for you, but you really get to see behind the scenes and actually talk to some of the presenters and work closely with journalists.
And just a thought for those of you guys who are going to be here next year or the year after, the folks at ONA have really started to take a long, hard look at Mizzou students for ONA Student Newsroom. In the last 2 years, we've had 4 students selected and 2 mentors selected. So we're really starting to make an impact with that group in a way where ONA applicants, or ONA Mizzou applicants are looked at.
Yeah, and it's a
favorably.
great way to represent we got the RJI was getting out Mizzou stickers that everyone put on their name tag. So I'm in the middle of interviewing Kelly McBride, and it's like, oh hey, how's it going? Also, they pay for everything, so.
And it's not a cheap conference to go to.
No, it's not.
No,
And if you can go while you get the student rate, go while you get the student rate.
and as good as Chicago was, I expect just by location, it's going to be even better next year because it's in San Francisco.
I thought next year's
It's
Los
also in
Angeles.
LA.
Oh, is it LA? Oh, okay. Well, either
But
way,
it's-
West Coast,
It's
And we
West
won't have
Coast.
an airport meltdown probably.
you're going to have folks.
Yeah.
You're going to
Quite
have folks coming down
literally.
from the valley, but there's
Fire
also a
and-
lot of stuff happening in LA and San Diego. So California will be a great place to do it. Oh, it's AEJ that's in San Francisco next year. That's it.
I can't tell you how valuable, I felt so much smarter when I came back. You know, it's just 3 days of filling your brain with great thinking and the knowledge of people who do this every day and think in great creative ways. It's exciting.
And how open those people are prepared to be with their
Yes.
time. That's what I was, you know, like Brian Boyer at NPR and whatever, like, they were just like, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you, I've never met you before. And it
Oh,
was
Brian's awesome. If
Yeah,
you've
but
never
that's
met
what
him,
I mean,
I'm
like-
happy to make the intro.
Yeah, no, so he gave me single most incredible architectural walking tour around Chicago. So that was another highlight, but yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people use it as a little inspirational vacation. Some of the newsroom mentors were saying, this is where I go to get re-excited about journalism, is to hang out with the students and the young people and all these people doing interesting things.
Yeah, if it's too hectic between sessions, which sometimes it is, you can grab them for 2 minutes, but they're running to somewhere else. Go to the social event. I mean, the lobby of the museum was packed.
Yes, it was.
And I doubt that a dozen people actually went into the museum. They
You mean
all-
like Beyond Sue?
Huh?
You mean like Beyond Sue? The dinosaur?
Yeah.
Like y'all just kind of hung out with Sue
In the
all night?
lobby or what, the main
Yeah.
area. You could go, if you put your drink down, you could go throughout the whole museum, which is a beautiful museum.
I don't think
They
anybody
all
did.
stayed
I
there.
didn't know
They
that.
all networked. They all networked. They all were talking. They never left and went down any of the corridors to see what was in that museum. And that's a perfect time because you catch the people. They're relaxed. They maybe had a drink, and they'll
Some
give you
really
maybe
bad
more than
wine.
30 seconds, because they're not running off to somewhere else. And they're all there. I mean, whether it's Hernandez or Digital First guys, Brady, and the rest of them, they're all there.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being here.